It is my pleasure to be interviewing the prolific author and biographer, Patrick McGillian, about his new book biography of Woody Allen, A Travesty of a Mockery of a Sham,
Mhm.
a hefty volume of which I read every single page, and it's 737 pages.
Oh, it's scary.
It is scary. Did you
Yeah,
know
don't drop it on your foot, I would say.
Well, did you know going into the project that it was going to be a monumental volume of such length?
Well, yes, I did, but sometimes it's easier when people have done fewer films if you're writing about a filmmaker. Although I did Orson Welles, and I didn't even write about one film because it ends before he calls the first take on Citizen Kane, and it's also 700 plus pages because it was a good story and I was enjoying it. In the case of Woody, I think better than the publisher did that his reputation was, greatly endangered, if not poisoned forever. And that the only way to do a good book on him would be to do every film and take a look at them afresh and then look at all of his life. And I had done Mel Brooks before that, and Mel Brooks is much easier because there's fewer films and there's also fewer films that are great,
And there's no scandal.
Yeah, well, there is, I found a little bit of scandal with Mel, and Mel was a good subject. He's Mel, so you get shouting and crazy behavior at the same time that you get funny stuff and really good stuff. But it was easier because there's fewer films. But Woody is 50 plus because you add in TV and Broadway shows and things that he's an actor, some of which are important and some of which are not. And yeah, it's a drag. But I did Hitchcock, and he had 50 plus, and I learned, in doing Hitchcock, first of all, he has a less, sensational private life or less colorful private life. But also that if I skipped one movie, some Hitchcock cinephile somewhere was going to strangle me. So I
Well,
was stuck. I was stuck. You know,
but you follow the same approach here because you do cover every film
I
and you
do follow
cover
the approach.
all of the films with a kind of equality, which I found surprising, that some of the lesser known films or less successful films are treated with the same respect and with the same attention to detail as the famous ones. But
Yeah,
you're very even-handed.
well, I try to be, and Foster, if you look at the poll of film critics and film professionals at the end of the book, where I talked to 100 plus people and asked them for their favorite Woody Allen film, you'll see why I'm forced to be somewhat even-handed because there's out of Woody's 50 plus films, something like 35 got votes for the five favorite or five best that he ever did, including films he didn't even do, like, What's New Pussycat, because he just wrote it, he didn't direct
Yes,
it.
yes.
So people agree on what is the greatest film for the most part, or the top 10 for the most part. And after that, you have rabid fans of all kinds of Woody movies that I would never pick myself.
Yes. That's wonderful that there's that spread.
There
But
it is. It shows, it says something. I'll tell you one thing uh, it says is that even though critics have something to do with his blacklisting, blackballing, and besmirchment, which is general, they have something to do with it. They are not fully responsible for it and don't endorse it. And some of them still like Woody Allen films.
well, that is a key point in the book, is that your book implicitly takes him seriously as an important, indeed essential American filmmaker. And don't you implicitly say there has to be a separation between the films and the private life? And at a certain point in the book, the scandal of what is it, August 4th, 1992, that infamous day in
Yeah.
the attic, and what happened or didn't happen, does take over the book. And you devote many, many pages to an in-depth recounting of the scandal and its aftermath.
Yeah. Well, I like to say this because it's true. The book was not my idea. I had done Mel Brooks, and the last thing I wanted to do was another New York Jewish comedy filmmaker because, first of all, I'm from the Midwest. I'm not very Jewish, except we're all Jewish in show business. But other than that, I always find it very like it's work for me to really think about it. And Woody had so many films, and he has so many problems and complications from a public point of view. I was obliged to dig into that and do my best to understand exactly what happened there, including, I went through it reading about it in the newspaper like everyone else and had an attitude at the time. But when my editor suggested Woody Allen as a topic after a long contentious conversation in which I didn't like any of his ideas and he didn't like any of mine, I said, sure, and he said, do you like his movies? And I said, pretty much. And he said, do you think he molested his adopted daughter? And I said, I don't think so, but if I find out he did, you'll be the first person to know about it. And I'll look very, very hard because when I go into this, I go into it with an open mind. And so, yes, we tried to have it not, cast a shadow over the whole book. So there's not a lot of foreshadowing. And then afterwards, there's a break after 1992 where nothing comes up, negative in his life really for about 10 years. He makes some very, very good movies. So that's a refreshing break. Uh, and then there were things like, for example, his son, Ronan. I had a lot more in the book about him. And my original editor, who left the project after the book had been prepared for publishing the first time, he said, I think we have too much about him. We don't need that much about him. And so we tried to rein it in and make sure that it doesn't take over the book. Because I think, yes, I can actually watch Take the Money and Run, and more so Bananas, which I think is funny, but certainly the early comedies, and laugh. And the funny thing is that a lot of very important critics can too. And they weren't holding this whole, I would say, disputed legacy against him when it came to talking about what films they really liked. So I was doing that poll, which was arduous and was probably a huge uh, piece of work I shouldn't have put upon myself, but I was doing that as I was working and doing the book because it took a long, long time to wrangle the votes. And I was influenced by the fact that people would name a movie that I didn't particularly care for. Also, my favorite movies are not in the top 10, or some of them are not. Or you'd have a critic who say, I don't like Annie Hall. So, I have to tell you, I'll do your poll, but I hate Annie Hall. I said, fine, say you hate Annie Hall. So you discovered one of the reasons why Woody is enormously influential as a comedy and comedic filmmaker in his own lifetime is that he did so many films that when people didn't like a film, they waited a little bit and another one came along that they loved and that people disagreed about what was great and what was not great. So if I love Stardust Memories and Deconstructing Harry, and I do, I don't care if they don't, although they might get angry with me if I do, so I kind of leave it out of the story that I like it.
But that's a point I want to bring up, Patrick, is you're very even-handed and you report all the reviews of each of the films. You cite the major critical responses, and you're a little withholding about your own attitudes toward the films, so that you are primarily a biographer and not a critic in this volume. Your critical assessments, I won't say are stingy, but they never dominate. Whereas
No,
as a writer, I'm far more opinionated than you are,
well,
and I let my opinions show. You do not. You
most
withhold.
biographers and film biographers do, and I'm the stingiest, and I would say I'm the least critic. In that I don't have a background as I do actually have a little background as a critic, but I don't esteem myself as a critic, and I don't hold my opinion over someone else's. I enjoy someone who tells me they love a movie that I don't like. very amused by that. Sometimes by the way, I'll give you a perfect example of how I'm won over. When my original editor read the text, and he really liked it, he was very favorable and had a few critical things to say that were helpful, very helpful. He said to me, "But Pat, can you do one little personal favor for me?" And I said, "Yeah, what?" And he said, "Can you like Manhattan Murder Mystery a little more?" And I said,
Well,
"Okay." He
but
said, "Because
Woody
I
has these
love that."
passionate, Woody has passionate partisans and
Yeah,
passionate naysayers.
yeah.
But
I'm
when
interested
we
in
get
both.
to the scandal, Patrick, when we get to the scandal and you handle it very even-handedly and in great detail, you tell us, you give a review of all of the testimony on both sides. I wanted you to take a side unequivocally. My feeling is he is innocent. And my feeling is Mia Farrow is a superb actress and a disturbed woman. And I would probably get in trouble if I wrote that. I might get in trouble for saying it here. I think he's been the victim of of a woman who was outraged by what he did to her, and then used her child in as a retaliation. And I don't know if we'll ever know what happened or did not happen in the attic, but I feel the evidence points to his innocence in that charge.
Yeah.
You,
If
you,
anything happened, if anything
if
happened,
anything happened,
if he was ever,
you don't come right out and say that Mia Farrow is a disturbed woman and that
no,
Woody Allen is a victim of her hysteria.
no, but
I wanted you to do that, but you wrote the
today
book. I didn't.
on Facebook, Foster, for example, there's a debate that Jerry Perry started by writing a rave review of the book in which he called it fabulous. And then he said, and what's great about it is McGillian doesn't commit himself to saying one way or another, but allows the reader to decide. And Joe McBride came along and answered him and said, something like, "Are you crazy? McGillian makes it very clear where he stands." So I will say to you that I don't like, I used to work for a radical newspaper and I am a radical, I'm an unregenerate radical. Uh, and I used to have to write editorials every day telling people what they should think. I don't like doing it. I don't like telling people what they should think, even about a movie. I like leading them up to the door, maybe opening the door a little inch, and then letting them think for themselves because I don't think my job is as a persuader. I just don't think that's my job. I don't feel good doing that.
Okay.
Now most people will come along and say, "Yeah, but you made it clear about this or you made it clear about that." And maybe I'm thinking to myself, privately, good. I'm glad you got my implicit ideas there because I prefer to leave them implicit. But I would just say about your basic premise, a couple of things about, first of all, Mia is a superb actress in Woody's films.
Superb,
Yeah,
superb,
superb. And there's
superb.
two or three of those films that are unthinkable without her, and they never get mentioned by all the people who are like talking about him being a groomer and everything else because they don't want to bring up the fact that Mia worked for him and did superb work in
I
some
think
of
there
his.
were 10 films, 10
Yeah,
or 11, and she was outstanding in each of them.
yeah. And the second thing I would say, again, to be fair to Mia, which I tried to be fair to Mia, even though I may or may not agree with you to an extent about what you said, is that she had good reason to be disturbed. First of all, probably in her upbringing, before you get to whatever happens next in her life.
Yes,
And then
she comes from a very dysfunctional family.
very dysfunctional family. She had a somewhat rambunctious Hollywood career before she came a cropper in that career and ended up back in New York trying to restart her career on Broadway and runs into Woody. But then she has real reasons to be disturbed because I think any girlfriend of anybody who finds out their daughter is sleeping with their boyfriend is going to go crazy.
Yes. And she does.
And
And she
she
does.
does. And
And
she,
she does.
I think it's quite understandable. And if I was the father, I would go crazy. Now, what happens next is a different matter. And I quote the son who doesn't go along with the family line, saying that,
Moses.
oh, the saying, that yes, it was a bad situation, but it got worse. And everybody on that side of the family made it worse. And that's one of the reasons why I say I talked about Ronan's role in all of this, because he has the mantle of being a very, honorable journalist, which I also cast a little doubt on in the book.
Yes, you do.
But there was only so much of, what I wanted to do in terms of laying out specifically what I think. Do I have secret thoughts? Yeah. Does it help anybody for me to say what I think? No, I don't think it does. But I think it's
Okay.
there. I think it's there because, that side of thinking, meaning the side that says Woody is guilty no matter what, the facts, that side doesn't care what I say. And
No,
I'm
and you're
condemned
not going to convince them one way or the other. They know
condemned for not saying that Woody is probably guilty. I'm not saying that, but I'm condemned for not saying that by that side anyway. So I didn't see any more than I do writing about Hitchcock or Mel Brooks or even George Cukor. First of all, I don't have a moral high ground most of the time in my life anyway. Feel I feel a lot of like what is happening to Woody is Puritanism. It's I don't want to say it's feminism gone amok, but it's Me Too gone amok. Grandfathering and everybody who came before him, them. So that a young girl whose judgment can be questioned is grandfathered into the Me Too movement. Or
yes,
grandmothered into the Me Too
yes.
movement. So, I just think as a story, it's a good story. It's a good life story. The tragedy of it is that everybody in the story, everybody turns out miserable uh, in some way.
In some
You know,
way, yes.
in
And
some way.
nobody escapes. But that
No,
day overtakes Woody's life, Mia's life, the lives of the children, and it
yeah,
continues to do so. It
yeah,
continues to do so, and it may remain forever unresolved. There are only two people
yeah,
who know what happened in that attic. A
yeah,
child, and how much can her testimony be relied on, and a filmmaker who is adamant in his innocence.
yeah. And I make it, I think, very clear in the book. And I went to great lengths to find out uh, what evidence there was, right up to calling the prosecutor in Connecticut in his retirement and asking him things, uh, that there is no evidence. So, I link it in the book to the Trump era and the MAGA era of like, the fact-free, fake news, fake fact, um, hysteria, which is what it is in a cult that believes this regardless. So, yeah, no one, I looked hard. We'd be having a different conversation if I produced a photograph of Woody and Dylan in flagrant delicto that I found, in the garbage
But you
somewhere.
didn't, there is no photo of such
And
that kind.
there's no evidence. There's no evidence. There's only she said, which is Mia believing Dylan, which again I think from the angry, crazy mother point of view is understandable.
But
In 19 in
so much,
1992.
no, but so much of the evidence seems to be that she was coaching this child.
I think
She
I
was
think I
coaching
think
her.
yeah, I mean, there's no question that and even the nanny in her book, talked about things that Mia said that predicted what would happen next because she was drumming it into everyone, that Woody is a molester of girls because that's the way she felt about what happened with Sun Yi. So, you know what? There's a terrible, terrible logic to the way things developed in that, terrible maybe fatalism to the way things developed. But you have to say, Mia was more the victor in the courts, but in
Yes.
her family, I think it wreaked havoc. Woody also did very stupid things. I
Yes,
mean,
he did.
off camera. I'm saying on camera, yes, the films are good, but uh, off camera, he did very stupid things. And even when he did stupid things that he might be able to, make explanations for publicly or defense for or apologies for, he also did not behave well, over and over again. Um, Eventually, he threw up his hands and he said, "I'm not going to discuss this anymore." And that's probably the best thing.
And that's the best thing. And he pretty much has stuck to it. But a
Yeah.
larger question here, Patrick, which
Yeah.
faces artists of all kinds. What do we do in separating the life from the work? Does Woody Allen have to be a perfect person, which he clearly is not, in order for us to enjoy his films, among them some of the greatest, I would say, ever made in America? Don't we have an obligation to separate the man or the woman from the work that they produced?
Well, it's an ideological position, and I accept it. But other people don't because it's an ideological position. So I run into people all the time who say I just can't watch his movies. Often those people will say I never thought he was funny anyway, or he's not a handsome romantic man. And
Or they rewrite their opinions of the film in the light of the scandal,
yeah,
which
yeah,
seems
which is
to have changed everything.
yeah,
I
it's
would
just even
say the scandal does not change the
yeah,
greatness of Annie Hall and even Manhattan, which of course is thematically problematic as it dramatizes a relationship between an older man and a younger woman.
absolutely. And I treat it that way in the book. And I actually have never liked that movie, but critics love it still. I
I
mean,
love it. I'm a New Yorker in a way that
yeah,
you aren't. I think it
It's a New
captures
York movie. I accept that it's in
an
French.
essence of New York, which is uniquely Woody Allen and uniquely Upper East Side. I would also take umbrage with people who say, well, he makes his Manhattan is about white people and about rich people. So what? That's the world that he knows. Why
Yeah,
should he be held to writing a movie that has to include people of color or people he doesn't know or deal with?
right. Well,
Why
they're all
hold him to that standard?
yeah, and none of them are realism. I mean, they're not realism. I saw the last movie in France with a BBC guy who was visiting in Paris and a Parisian documentarist friend of mine, and we loved it. We the one that's in French, and we came. Of course, I didn't understand it. She told me what, but you can understand it without knowing the dialogue. And I came out, and the BBC guy said, "It's just ridiculous. He creates this like total fantasy of the upper middle class, and there's no realism in it at all." I go, yeah, "What? You want realism from Woody Allen? It's ridiculous. First of all, he's a surrealist, and I think there's like maybe one movie later." Towards the end when he try or towards the middle when he tries to make like a realistic movie just for to see how it might work out. But he's a dramatist. He's not there's no realism. So the fact
And
that he's
why should he be held to that standard?
that's right, that's right. And honestly, I think I explained that pretty well in the book that, he had a love of upper Manhattan
He
comedy.
loves the Upper East Side.
He
He
loved the Upper
loves
East
the Upper
Side.
East Side.
Yeah,
He
you know what?
loves wealth. He loves private clubs. He loves fancy restaurants. I've seen him at fancy restaurants. He loves going out on the Upper East Side. So what?
Right, right. Spike Lee defended him at one point before he later on didn't defend him, saying that he didn't have, lots of white people in his movies. And Scorsese said, "Your New York is different than my New Yorker." Yeah,
Well,
well,
of
it
course.
sure is. Of
It
course.
sure is. It sure is. And they're
Yeah,
both great filmmakers with a very different vision of New York.
yeah. I mean,
Why should Woody
the
be held
problem with
accountable
Manhattan,
for it? His interests, which are his New York is about from the 59th Street to 96th Street on the East Side. And so what?
yeah, yeah. The problem
I
with
think it's
Manhattan
wonderful.
isn't his vision of Manhattan. It's his vision of the young girl that he's going after in the movie. That's a lot more problematic than like his ecstatic vision of Manhattan.
But his films are very autobiographical, and you can feel this is a man, and you do deal with this, a filmmaker for whom sexuality and sexual expression are of paramount significance. And there are those
Yeah.
who would say that Woody Allen is indeed a very attractive man. I am among them. I think he's
I
wonderful
agree.
looking. He's a
Totally
wonderful
agree.
looking man.
That's a conversation ender for me when someone says, I never found him handsome or a funny or a good leading man. It's like I just my face goes blank. I mean, he's who wouldn't like Woody Allen? I can't even understand it. Like Diane Keaton likes Woody Allen. I mean,
Yes, indeed. And he's sort of adorable.
he's adorable, and also he makes jokes about it all the time in his own movies. He's funny, he's smart. This is sexy.
Yes, and
And
he's
early on, before people had turned against him, people were talking about how writing articles about how he was the new kind of Hollywood. He was a new man for a
and
romantic comedy or
indeed he
for a leading
was.
man.
It was
There were
very
also
convincing.
feminists writing about it at the same time, and they didn't like that kind of new man who had like Playboy jokes. But he is that. He's a combination of like a new kind of Hollywood hero, anti-hero. I mean, in the front, he's a hero, and he's very believable and handsome and
And he's
charming.
very believable as
Yeah.
a man that some women would find exceedingly attractive.
Yeah, I mean,
And
sometimes and I do say this in the book again, implicitly. I think it's anti-Semitism. I just think it's anti-Semitism. There's a lot in his career and people's reaction to him and his jokes and his persona and the way he looks and the way he positions himself as a guy in search of girls in his movies. That their reaction it becomes an anti-Semitic reaction, just as in the whole post 1992 and the 1992 court cases, there was that element too of this like, older Jewish New Yorker going after a little blonde girl, which is it was either implicit and then every once in a while someone would say something that like brought out it explicitly.
yes, exactly. And I'm glad that you mentioned that. And he had a very ambivalent relationship to his Jewish background.
Yes. Yes.
But but he is inescapably and I would say ultimately triumphantly Jewish. His comedy is Jewish comedy. His
Yeah.
shtick is Jewish shtick. He should be very grateful to his parents for bringing up this nice Jewish boy
I
who
think
had who was
eventually he
able to
was.
make jokes about his Jewish upbringing.
Yeah, yeah, it's so essential to his identity, and that's one of the things that gave me pause about saying yes, because I would have to understand that, and as
Yes.
best I could, and I did that by doing my research and doing my best to meet Woody halfway, which is what I do when I write about a biography. I try to understand the person and meet them halfway. So it's half my voice, half their voice, or half my feeling about them and half their feeling about themselves.
And his complicated relationship to his Jewish background
Yeah.
is actually essential to his entire work and to his persona.
Absolutely. It's
He is a
hysterical.
Jewish filmmaker.
Absolutely. He's hysterical on the subject, and I
Yes.
like the ones, by the way, when you say he's often in the movies, I like the fact that the movies are often an auto critique. They're often self criticism, like Deconstructing Harry is like a hilarious self criticism of Woody himself, or Husbands and Wives is a very blistering self criticism of Woody himself. I mean, when he writes about himself, it isn't always, aren't I witty and charming?
No.
He's often a loser.
Yes, and very, very critical, and that's part also of the Jewish aesthetic that he's
Absolutely.
dealing with. What I found a little frustrating about your book, and it has nothing to do with you, but you would ask, or questions were asked of actors. How does he direct an actor? I love the acting in
Yeah.
Woody Allen films. Mia Farrow, every time out, is fabulous.
Thank
Diane
you.
Keaton, every time out, is fabulous. The acting is immaculate in his movies. Diane Weiss, 2 Academy Awards. She's superb. But nobody in the book is able to say what he does in dealing with actors that leads to the Woody Allen performance style. And there is a style. There
Yeah.
is a style, but nobody could say how it's arrived at. It was as if when actors, articulate actors, would try to say what it was that Woody said to me or didn't say to me that led to the performance, it was frustrating. What did he do? to get the performances that he got from actors, and they are of uniform excellence.
Well, I think if I had tried to explain it, it would make that part of the book very bad and boring. Because, ultimately, Foster, you know this because you write about people that ultimately there's a mystery to their greatness. So for example, I wrote about Jack Nicholson. Well, when Jack goes into his, state and then he delivers his performance out of himself, he gets help from the director. He gets help from the script. He gets help from all of his background and his particular psyche. But ultimately, what comes out is mysterious how it comes out. So it's a blend of all those things. It is. I think that's true of Woody too. But the most important thing about Woody that we haven't talked about at all yet is that he's writing everything throughout his career, which makes him a greater, to me, auteur than the auteur who doesn't write. And then
Yes.
he's so prolific with such a high batting average when he's doing it. So when he's writing for himself, he's writing in his zone. He knows what he can do, and he's directing himself. There's not a lot of people that do this in the history of the cinema. And probably the greatest example is Chaplin and then Orson Welles. And then there's not too many others. And certainly not to that extent so often. So he's not only writing for himself, but then he's writing for, when he was writing for Keaton or for Mia Farrow, the women were the greatest in those movies. Or when he did Scarlett Johansson later or Penelope Cruz, he has an idea who the people are, what they can do. He knows, and sometimes he knows because he's so smart about this. He has the 5 minute meeting where he doesn't even want to shake their hands, and they want to go to lunch with him. And no,
No,
why?
but he obviously takes in a lot about the person in
Yeah,
that 5 minute meeting.
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
sure he is shrewd as hell about people.